Good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, summarizing and reviewing the conclusion. We're on page 1371, bottom of 1371. In the middle of discussing Baraisa, in contrast to Mishna. So what we learned yesterday was a qualification that helps understand a bit the distinction between Mikra, Mishna, Talmud. So Mikra would basically be like, I'm using my own language here a bit, like the etzem, the nukuda, the etzem before it expands into detail. So it's like higher than Gilui. And the only way it could express itself is the nehi, the chitzenius sheba'elyon, as he called it, like igulim. So igulim is a high level, but what you have in expression is a very, what he calls katnus. Because you don't have pnimius, you don't have gilui, but you have a very high level. So you have the outer of a very high level, the nehi of Chabad of Atzilus, which manifests in Asiya. Mishna is a maila, because Mishna now takes Chagas and reveals the details of that. So it's like Yesher, pnimius, so it's taka the pnimius of a tachten, not of an alien, which is not as high as the chitzenis of alien, so it doesn't come down as much into the actionable side, but it does come down to the details. The Maila Fiaklal B'chinas says this is like a level of Godless. And that's the Maila of Pnimius. When it comes to Baraisa, Baraisa is not this Chalkas Apratim of Mishnah. This is due to a diminishment. Because the Giluyim of Mishnah are still in a place that is relatively for a higher level of understanding, and the Kalim of the Mekablim have become weaker. Like he said later, he says a little later, that Zman Ba'isheni Yorda B'chinas Malchus L'Islabish Ba'ayin Sodim Levada B'chinas Neged Asiya. So here, the breakdown of the details is not mitzad amayla, mitzad achson. It's not breaking down the details of Mikra, it's breaking down further details of Mishnah to bring it to someone who's not on that level of Mishnah. So yes, it's breaking in more details, but it's due to a diminishment of the Eira Chochma itself. Like he says in Mishnah, HaChochma meir b'Mishnah yeser mi b'Braises. Because at the end of the day, Braises is for someone with smaller containers. So he needs more details. So there, the details are more in order to bring it down to a lower level. Whereas a Mishnah, it's more the revelation of the details, like the pnimius, in a pnimiusdik way, whereas a Mikra remains in a makivdik way, remains above, because it's beyond seichel, beyond gili. That's what we learned. Okay. So I'll continue from the last few words on the page 1371. Where he continues to explain Baraisas. This will go for another half a page approximately. So he says now from some sources. He's going to quote some sources. So the bottom line is Zelashene Hapardis. So the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And we're talking here, the bottom of the page, Zelashene Hapardis. The Pardis is the Pardis of Ramoshe Kordoviro, Ramak. Be'erech Bar. In the entry on the word bar. So again, the Pardes has a section that is a little encyclopedic. Not all the Pardes. Ma'ira that we've discussed a number of times is actually a Kabbalistic encyclopedia. But there is a thing called Erche Kinuyim, the Erech, a section of Kinuyim, of expressions in alphabetical order in the Pardes. So in the Erech called bar, remember Baraisa comes from the word bar, chutz, outside of. So he says, top of page 1372, but Tikkunim Pirish says the Pardes. Tikkunim is Tikkunim Zeir. So he's quoting from Zeir, from Tikkunim Zeir, Pirish, Chulu, Kiatzadik, Kishugayla, the Yerid Bimkeme Nikra Bar Loshem Baraisa. At Tzadik, when he's exiled, the Yerid Bimkeme and goes down from his natural place. So when a Tzadik is living in his, let's call it holy town, so to speak, or in a place which is his natural place, he's at home, so to speak. But if he's goyli, you send him off in Golus, and he goes away from his mokim, his natural mokim, that's what's called bar. Like he said, chutz, Remember, he said, Baraisa Loshel Chutz, because he slapshes b'pchinas chutz, and he's bringing proof now. The Pardes is a continuation of what we learned yesterday. It's not a new thing. He's continuing what we learned that Baraisa Loshel Chutz, he slapshes b'pchinas chutz, with the Ayin Sodom, where Malchus is going now outside of the realm of Kedusha, outside of the tchum, of the boundaries of Kedusha. That he says, that's when he's called Bar, Loshem Baraisa. Ki atzadik, it's still the language of the Pardes. Ki atzadik ovad v'hanar yechrav v'yovesh v'hibegela halocha. So he's bringing a pasuk that says that tzaddik ovad, the tzaddik is like lost, meaning lost in exile. V'hanar yechrav, and the river is destroyed, the yovash, and dried out. It's all symbolism of a Golus state where things are parched and you don't have the moisture of Kedusha. The he begela halacha. That's the gela of halacha. Halacha meaning Torah is in a state of Golus. Like for example, when you say a person goes off to Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, it's also called Golus. Gelin Rabbi Imei. It's a state of Golus, a state of displacement, essentially, spiritual displacement. Ad kan l'shene. So this essentially is solidifying a proof to what he said earlier, that Baraisa is connected to Hamshoche l'chutz. So it's not just that it was learned outside of the Mishna or outside of the Beis Medrash, or it was not included in the Mishna itself. That's the technical part. The deeper reason for it being Baraisa is because it's going to a further outer place where Mishna was more for the Mokam HaKedusha. And now we're going to a place that's, like he says, the Ayin Sodim, the 70 ministers of the world, which are dealing with Klippas Nega, that's Yered, Malchus is Yered, and Nega Da'asiyah. So it's like Bidurim. In a way, like the difference between Shabbos and Chayil. So Shabbos is the tchum of Holy Shabbos Kodesh, Lahavdil ben Shabbos v'Chayil. Chayil is more the mundane. He's not saying that example here, but it's similar. Shabbos would be Pnim, inside, and Chutz is like Chayil, when you're going out to the mundane or the physical world and the creation of existence. That is, we call it Milah Dehedyeta, where God, so to speak, goes out of his natural divine place, Atzilus, and is going into Biyah. In this case, in Asiyah. Okay. Another source he's bringing now, Ma'er E'er. Ma'er E'er, as I mentioned, is very often cited in Chassidus. It's from Amer Papirish. And it's encyclopedic, Kabbalistic encyclopedia. What does he say? Ayin Beis Sifnun Gimel. Before he brought Ma'er E'er, if you recall, about the Shifcha, in Erech Mem, Mishna. Now he's talking about Beis. Ayin Beis Sifnun Gimel. So Bar says that Ma'er E'er hu hayisod kishu begolus labar ma'asrei. Bar is the level of Yesod when it's in a state of Golus, in a state of displacement or exile. Labar ma'asrei. It's outside of its domain. Asrei is like Asar. Asrei means Asar, the location or the domain of in its natural place. So Yesod is now leaving its natural domain in a state of Golus. That Oz, Malchus Nikra Oz Baraisa. Malchus then is called Baraisa, outside. So no, Malchus is encompassed and connected with Yesod on Yesod's terms, on the Mashpia's terms, then it's not Baraisa. But when Yesod goes in a state of Golus, outside of its location, then Malchus is called Baraisa. So now we see the difference in Malchus. Before we learn Masnisa, Malchus, a Mishna was called Malchus, but that's Malchus not outside. That's Malchus in Atzilus. Like we learned, Malchus of Atzilus, which later becomes manifests in the 6 facets of Yitzira, Malchus of Yitzira, which is Mishna. But here we're talking about Baraisa, which is outside of it's in a state of Golus. So you see Baraisa again connected to what he called earlier Bizman Ba'asheni. Essentially means when we're getting closer to the time of Golus. So Baraisa, they're clearly connected to this concealment, a lower state. Mishna, you don't say that. You don't say Mishna is a state of Golus compared to Mikra. Even though Mishna is an elaboration and the details, but Baraisa is associated with a Yerida, what he called before, Nismaya to Akelim, that the Makablim are on a lower level, and that's why they need more details. But the more details come due to the fact that there's less oir. There's less oir HaChochmah because it's now being brought down to a lower level of Makablim who need more explanation, like he explained. Who inyan ragle yerdes, and this refers to the expression on Malchus is when it's ragle yerdes moves. It says its legs descend below. So the king is sitting on his throne, but his legs go downward into Biyah. So there's Malchus when it's in the state of Aliyah, and it's reaching upward. We learned this Malchus, Yichud, Malchus, and Zah, where Malchus is reaching and connecting to Zah and to the higher levels. But then there's how Malchus gets disconnected, so to speak. And as it gets disconnected due to Golus, then it's called Raglei Yerdes, Sheyarda Lamata B'Asiyah. And it descends downward into Asiyah, which is obviously a far lower level. Now, Asiyah here, he doesn't mean Asiyah like we learned about Mikra and Asiyah. Here we're talking about diminishment due to Golus. Mikra is an Asiyah not because of Golus. Mikra is an Asiyah because it's such a high level, higher than revelation. The only way it could be expressed is an unrevealed way, in a story form, in an action based. Here it's Asiyah mitzad achsor, not mitzad hamayla. Valkain. And because this was now a spiritually lower state, a diminished state, that's why they needed Baraisa, not just Mishna. Shehu b'kitzur hashpa b'bchinas helam. That condenses the hashpa. Yes, it brings it into more detail, but the oil itself is being far more diminished, far more condensed, he calls it, b'kitzur hashpa b'bchinas helam, and more concealed. The oil is being concealed as you're bringing more details, like he said earlier, because you have to sark l'hayalam hashpa shatov b'efen achar. That's all Baraisa. When he spoke about Netzach Chayid Yisayid, all the things that are necessary to bring it down a level, they're all indicators of a concealment. Whether it's the concealment of Netzach within himself or in the flow, or expressing it in a different paradigm, these are all concealments of the Katzer Hashpah, and ultimately that the Makabel should be able to receive it. So the positive side is that a lakus of Torah is coming down now to lower levels. In Mishna, it comes down, but not to that extent. Now it's being brought down, which of course is critical to our whole theme of interface, because we don't just want Torah in time of Geula, in time of the Beis Hamikdash. We want a Torah also in time of Golus. So Baraisa is drawing it down to that level. Talmud is going to draw it down even more in a whole new level. But right now we're still talking about Baraisa. So, l'hainu shemitzad helam v'hester haklipa be'elam asiyah iev shalakala b'chinas gilei due to the helam v'hester, the concealment and the cover-up of the klipa in world of asiyah, because now we're descended into a lower world. Iev shalakabel, the recipient cannot receive b'chinas gilei the gilei as it is in Atzilus, as it is in Mishna. Only when it comes to more condensed form, and it gets concealed. That's the katnus, the less developed. The katnus here, not mitzad the anakuda like a mikra. Katnus here mitzad diminishment and miyut hakelim, and the diminishment of the containers of this student that's on a lower level. The gam, and additionally. And also, in order for the Torah to descend this low, who dafka mebchinas nehi is dafka from nehi. Nehi of what? We're talking about nehi of Zah, not nehi of Chabad. Who commission is bar le'il, like we learned earlier. The bchinas haprimis eini yochel lered lamata kol kach. The previous cannot come down that much. We learned it by Mikra, but the same principle applies. The previous cannot come down that low. So previous, which is Mishna, Chagas, is a primi, not a makif. Like we learned, it's a primi. That's why it's the Mishna is, where do you see its main revelation is in Yetzirah. We're talking about Amshach of Giluyim now, not the Amshach of the Etzem of Mikra. Amshach of Giluyim to come to Asiyah. who mebchinas nehi sheba behelem, that comes as nehi of za, of the Mishnah, that extends from the Mishnah, that labar outside, sheba behelem at sheyochel liyas hamshacha gam b'asiyah, that the hamshacha should also be an asiyah. So basically, it works like this: Mikra is expressed in asiyah in a story form and just basic mitzvahs without details, without explanations. You need Mishnah because you can't do a mitzvah without Mishnah. The mitzvah has to, Mishnah is agili. It's megala, that which remains concentrated and concealed in Mikra, and you only get the outer surface. But what about a person who's not on the level of Mishnah? How does he bring it down a level? So there, Baraisa takes the Mishnah and brings it down even to a diminished form on the level Giluyim, even to a lower level. Give me 1 second, please. 1 second. Sorry about that. So essentially, you can say that we have the etzem and asiyah mitzad mikra, and the giluyim and asiyah from Yesira mitzad Baraisa. So the Baraisa is more in the world of giluyim, that we should be able to understand what it says. Mikra is not understandable. There's no explanation. Mishna explains, but it's too high of an explanation, and you need to bring it down lower. So it's actually quite eloquent if you think about it. It's just a little complex because you have to think of on two different levels what asiyah is. So, for example, when you talk about ben chumash mikra, a little child can learn chumash, but then they don't have a real understanding. What about an adult? An adult that has understanding, and Mishnah is too above them in Giluyim. So Baraisa serves the role of bringing the Torah of Mikra into Mishnah, then into Baraisa, Lachutz, even to a place of Asiyah where there's the Helam like we just learned here. Okay. Now he's going to continue to explain the difference between Mikra and Asiyah and Baraisa and Asiyah. Let's learn this, and then I'll stop for questions. So he says, from this we understand the Eina Daima, you cannot compare that you can't compare this to the way Mikra is an Asiyah. Because you now said Mikra is an Asiyah, now you told me Baraisa is an Asiyah. Because that's where Malchus is Yered, Ragleh Yerdis, all the way into Asiyah, the Ayin Sarim of Golus. So he says you can't compare. Why? So he says like this. The Masha Mikra Ba'asiyah, because what we said earlier, that Mikra is an Asiyah, who adrab, Mpeneshu Madrega Nailis Yeser. That Duta Maila, it's in Yasiyah because since it's a higher level, the Chala Gavei Yeser, that which is higher, comes down lower. Not because it's being diminished. It's because it's such a high level of Gilui, or what he called before higher than Gilui. The only thing that you can have is an outer expression of it. The only thing is that what you're getting is only the outer surface, or the tip of the iceberg of that Elyon, that Gavoya B'Yesek. That which is such a high level, you're only getting a nakuda from it. You're getting like a drop, but the drop is coming from a very high level. Mikra, and that's why Mikra, the verse, Hagam Sheba Rak Be'esius, even though, like we learned earlier, it's only Asius, it's only letters. It doesn't have all we don't have the Gilim of the Taimim, the Kudis, Tagin. It's only letters. You're reading letters. Yes, you can understand the Pshat, but you don't see much more than the literal interpretation without deeper explanation. So even though it comes in letters, because that's what's revealed to us. When we look at Mikra, we see a Kedusha Biksav of 305,804 letters. That's what Kedusha Biksav consists of. That's what we see. Ubamaisa b'peil mamish. And we only relate to, it only talks about action things. Build a sukkah, tefillin, tzitzis, whatever the action is. Umakol mokim, nevertheless, in that that outer dimension, so to speak, and here he adds a critical point. Nevertheless, within this, you can sense or you can perceive like we actually see in a palpable way. The Teda Shebiksav nirgish b'zeh elikus. The Teda Shebiksav, you just feel that there's something divine about it, precisely because of its cryptic nature in a way. In other words, in Gemara, in Mishna and Talmud, as we're going to learn, you see more the seichel. Not to say there's no divine, but when you start getting involved, for example, two people are arguing, kula shali, kula shali. Reuven says, you infringed on my property. Shimon says something else. Or you get to a question, is this korban kosher or not kosher? You start getting into the discussion of what makes something holy, kosher, what makes something not kosher. So even though it's all Torah Hashem, but there the seichel dominates. So you don't quite feel the elikus within it until you focus on it. The Mikra, when you read a pasuk, he says, Nida b'chush, you sense something is something transcendent about it, something divine about it. Now I know when we just learned it the first time, people said, well, not everybody feels that. But if you think about it, there is a certain element. As a matter of fact, I wrote on my margin, I wrote the Pardes in Ramak mentions this when he talks about Mikra and is brought in Eira Teda. Nigus b'zeh elikus. Now, when you say nigus b'zeh elikus, doesn't mean you understand it. It doesn't mean you can relate to it. It doesn't mean that it's internalized. But what he's trying to say is that the Mikra and Asiyah is not due to diminishment. It's on the contrary. Its intensity is so powerful that you get only a drop, because that's all you can get, but you're getting a drop from a very high level. And that's why in Eichus, in quality, Mikra has that element. That's why when a person reads Mikra, there's a certain Kedusha in it that even Lo Yoda my Kamar, even if you don't understand the words are holy. Now, can you say the same thing about Mishna and Talmud? They have a holiness, but not quite the Kedusha says. That's why you don't find the treatment of a Gemara and a Mishnah like you do the treatment of a Sefer Teda. Sefer Teda, we rise. Someone brings a Gemara into the room, you don't have to rise. A Sefer Teda, God forbid, falls on the floor. It's a major tragedy. Every letter, if there's a letter cut in Torah Sheba'al Peh, a letter is, let's say, illegible or become erased or defaced, fine, you can fix it. Doesn't make the Gemara apostle. In Torah, all that doesn't apply. Torah, the Kedusha Se'esis, because there's a level of higher Kedusha there. That Giluyim and Seichel, no. But in Atzmi, in Makifim, like I said, in Igulim, it's a very high level. Mashenkein, Baraisa Sheba'asiyah. But when you say Baraisas come into Asiyah, Nihi, that come into Asiyah, because Malchus is there in Asiyah, Hu Sheba Bis Almus. There, it's the exact opposite. It's not such a tremendously high level that you're only getting a drop of. But this is coming in actually state of concealment. And you don't recognize and see the intense divine light within it. On the contrary, it's been diminished for the kelim of the Makabel that can only receive that which he can receive. Gam bepochus Mishna canal. And even less than there is in a Mishnah. In Mishnah, there's more gili. So there's more detail in Baraisa, but not more gili. More detail because you're breaking it down in order to explain it to a person on a lower level of seichel, like he said, someone who Mishnah, it doesn't you don't have to spell it all out because the person gets it because they get the oir. And that's what we meant before that. Mikre called Nehisha Be'elyon is the chitzenius of the Elyon. Here we're talking about Nehisha Be'tachten, the chitzenius of the Tachten, which Mishnah is the primus of the Tachten. And Baraisa is the Nehi, the chitzenius of the Tachten. Shemiskatzur Mesalama Eir, that the Eir, the light gets diminished and concealed. Umeshum Zeh Hu Ba Ba'asiyah. And that's why it comes into Asiyah, because of its diminished level, not because of its intensity. Earlier we learned, just to add one more point that can help, in volume 1, when he spoke about Eisen Chetem Peh, so he spoke about the forehead. Now, Chochmas Adam Teir Ponov, he said. Sometimes you see the wisdom of a person shines on their face. Now, what does that mean? When you look at someone's face that's glowing, the aura of an intelligent person, you're not going to understand something from that. So he explains there because it's an atzmi. Since it's an atzmi, it bursts through, even the face has a different glow. So when you're learning something and you see the face of your teacher, it can help. But it's not just the glow itself. So he gives an example there that you have a barrel of wine that is sealed. You don't see the wine. But the wine is so intensely concentrated there that it's literally filling up the barrel and literally basically almost bursting at the seams. But it doesn't quite burst. But what do you see? Between the seams on the barrel, he says, you see drops. You see drops of wine. Not drops out of tzimtzum, that you're diminishing the wine and you're just giving someone a drop because they can't drink more. Here's the opposite. It's only drops because it's so packed. So the drop is giving you a sign that inside there's a tremendous amount of energy. He says that's like Chochmas Adam T'er Panav. So when you see a nekuda can come from a diminished state, that all you're getting is 1 point because you can't yet relate to it, one drop. Or it's one drop because it's so intense that it's so concentrated and the only thing you expresses itself is in a drop. So the same drop can either be due to diminishment or due to intensity. The intensity of the wine within the barrel expresses itself only in the fact that you see drops. Now, if you open the barrel, you suddenly realize where those drops are coming from. Similar explained between a mayon and a nohar, between a live spring of water, which only is drop, drop, drop. And a nohar, a river, is an expansive river. If you looked at Giluyim, there's much more water in a river than in a mayon, in a live spring. But a live spring is connected to the source, and all you can get from it is a drop. So this explains the same idea. The drop there is more powerful qualitative than the quantity of the river. It's similar to like difference in Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah is only a nekuda, but that nekuda carries the concentrated wisdom of Kesed, of the superconscious. Bina is Rechevas Hanar. It's expansive. You see someone with Bina, he's elaborating, fleshing it out, breaks it down, but it's due to a diminishment, not due to an intensity. Now here he's talking about on a lower level, he's talking here about Nihi and Za, Chagas and Nihi of Mishna and Baraisa, but it's the same similar idea. Okay. This ends the Baraisa topic, and then he's going to go to Talmud, go back a little to Baraisa, I think, and then starts a long discussion on Talmud. Or maybe even here, I would make a new paragraph on the Vihine Talmud. I'm going to stop here for questions. We learned the whole topic now. And we came to the conclusion of Baraisa. Any questions, any comments, any points that need to be clarified?
I have a question about the limited extent. I don't mean by diminishment. I understand clearly why you resisted my question about Tzimtzum of the ore from Atzilus, from Chabad of Atzilus for Mikra. Sorry, it's Nehiv and Atzilus. Anyways, but I understand what you just said. The clarification question is that which is visible to us, if you will, in Asiya, this chitzonius of Nehiv Atzilus, is that limited amount that we see a function of because it's chitzonius and it somehow it's not a full revelation of that or all the ore is there, but our kalim are too small to appreciate the elokus in the ore, so we can only absorb, like, let's say it's a small container, so there's tons.
Yeah, so let's just go back to the language that the Rebbe Rashab himself explains it. Go back to the bottom of 1365, and there he says the following. Because the Gilia of Mikra is from such a high level, the Yusedosa Bahari Kedesh, I'm reading 4 lines from the bottom of 1365.
I see.
And its foundation is in the highest mountains. So that's the level of mikra. It's coming from such a high level. It cannot, because it's coming from a place that's higher than hasaga, higher than gili. So gili is not a keli for it. And he continues to explain. He continues to explain in the next page. He explains again. So like I explained with the barrel, when things are coming from, let's say, a super conscious place, the only place of expression is going to be in a very like action-based or a story or just a nakuda, like he says. He goes on, he says, afterwards he says the same thing. The next page. That seals any yochel love bizgal rak dafke b'mokam hayesa nomoch. I gave, I think 5 or 6 or maybe even more examples for it in our lives of how we see that when we learned it back then. So now Elyon Yeser Elyon, where there's Eris and Kalim, and the Eir and Kali are commensurate to each other, like Yitzira. So there, Mishna, there's an Eir and a Kali, but if the Eir is higher than regular Eir, it's not Gili, and therefore higher than the Kalim, the Kali for it will be a very much of an Asiya type of Kali, not a full-blown Kali like Mishna. That's essentially what we did.
So it's because the Kali is too small.
I remember at least giving 5 or maybe more examples for it. I don't remember what they are right now, but I learned when I taught it before.
So again, is it that the Kali's too small, or the or is just not...
all I can say is what I just read. I don't think, to me, it's very clear what he says. What's missing?
I think
he doesn't say the Kali is too small. He doesn't use those words. He uses the Kali is too small on Baraisa. When the Kali is too small, you have to diminish the light so the Kali should be able to receive it. He doesn't say that at all. He doesn't use that term at all. He's not talking about the Kalim there. He's talking about the intensity of the Eir is higher than Gili. The only way it could express itself is just in a very tip, only a concentrated point, like a Mayon, like we said here. You know, the different examples were like the barrel, I gave the example. An Atzmi can only express itself in a Nakuda. The depth, I think I gave the example of Dibur, that when you speak, you can only communicate things that are open to revelation, but some of the deepest, most intimate things will only be expressed in a cry, in a laugh, sometimes in silence. I remember that example I gave. I gave a bunch of examples for this. I think you should just go back there, you know.
Yeah, I was probably so caught up with my effort to argue the Tzimtzum. Yeah. Well, I was arguing Tzimtzum, so I wasn't listening as carefully. I'll go back. I understand your point. Thank you.
Yeah.
In a Balabatisha way, is a follow-up to this question. It seems like the more concise the revelation of Elikus, and here we're talking about Osios, of different levels of Torah, the more concise the higher the source.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. No, because Baraisa could be more concise than Mishna, like he just said, and it's a sign of actually diminished. When you talk to a child, Aleph Beis is not necessarily a sign that it's coming from a highest level. It's because the child could only hear Aleph right now. That's not the discussion. Mikra is a whole different discussion. Mikra is about a Atzmi, the etzem of Teira, or Teira as it is higher than Gili, that the only place it can express itself is in Asiya. He's not talking about looking at, you can look at a Nakuda and it's just a Nakuda. It's just a little piece. You're giving someone like a bite-sized piece does not necessarily mean there's an etzem in there. That's the whole distinction here.
Understood.
I think you're just, I don't know why, you think you're just thinking too much about your way of looking at it. You have to remember, he's distinguishing very clearly between Baraisa and Mikra exactly in this way. Baraisa is also diminished. It's also Asiya, but it's a very different way of looking at Asiya. It's Asiya due to limitation, to diminishment, and the Mikra is due to its intensity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have one question. We are talking about influence of Torah on Asiya. I remember that Torah purify our soul. So, and it's one of the purpose of Torah. You mentioned Mayan and Diane like a river and a spring, but we also have a dew as a type of purification of our soul. And from this point of view, if I can suggest Mikra as a dew, purify our soul like a dew, and a river and spring like a Mishna and Baraisa. Can I suggest this idea?
You can suggest it, but I wouldn't accept it. I don't think it's correct. Number one. Number two, he doesn't mention it here at all. So what is it based on?
I understand.
I would say the opposite. That Mikra is like a Mayon, and Mishna is like is more like a river. But if you're going to already use that, since he doesn't use that example, it's my example. I wouldn't use my example more than need be. I just use it to bring out one point. But I would not apply that here because the Rebbe Rashab didn't. And to me, it just confuses matters when you start looking into it in more detail.
When you said that, I add do just to the full.
Yeah, but you added it. Not the Rebbe Rashab didn't add it, and it's not mentioned here at all. And I don't. And if you knew all the Maimorim about do and about Mayan, you'd see there'd be more. It'll just create more complications. It's more. It's not consistent with what he says here.
All right. Thank you.
So why force it? Yeah. I'm sorry, I just have to tell you how I see it. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. So, no other questions, then the next piece, I'll just give an introduction. He's now going to go into the world of Talmud. Now, just to give you the lay of the land, Talmud is going to go now, after he finishes Talmud, he's going to go back to the written Torah and to the oral Torah, and to put it all into context of what Torah does in helping refine this world. But we're coming away with, as we've already discussed, 3 levels of Makabel, which he's going to get back to, not so fast, on page 1386. So we have another good 14 pages. He's going to talk about Talmud, and then he's going to talk about Torah in general. It'll be very helpful to understand the context. And then he's going to bring it back to the 3 levels of the moonlight, the luminous glowing stone, and the eyesight. And the context with the Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, which in Talmud, Mishnah, and Mikra. And so at the end of the day, it is about how Torah interfaces with existence to help us, guide us, and direct us, and illuminate the path, God's path, in this dark world. That's the ultimate goal here. So Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud all play their unique role in this and function. So the next section, which definitely should be a new paragraph, the Hine Talmud, is going to start talking about Talmud. And I'll just read a few lines just to open up what we're going to be doing here. Because Talmud now, the question is, what's the role of Talmud? We know that Mishnah and Baraisa alone is not enough to take away halachas today. In the time of the Mishnah, clearly he said, there are those that were able to see in the Mishnah everything that the Baraisas hold, and definitely what the Talmud has. So Talmud is clearly coming into a darker world, even darker than the world of Baraisa. Baraisa is still a level of Tanoim. It's coming from the Bali Mishnah. It's the Mishnah as it comes outside of the realm of Malchus of Atzilus. It goes into Raglei Yerdis, like he called Bar, Golus, that's going into a state of Golus. But after Baraisa comes a whole new generation, after the destruction of the temple, that would begin a very, very dark Golus. So he's going to explain how Talmud is very much involved in the true darkness of this world. Because Baraisa, at the end of the day, we're going to learn, is still a Gilui. is just a Gilui that's less than Mishnah, and it comes more outward. But Talmud, we're going to learn, is part of it is our initiation, our struggling with trying to understand what it says in Mishnah and Baraisa. Mishnah and Baraisa, when the students and the Tanoim taught it to themselves and between themselves they discussed it and their students, there it wasn't due to a struggle. They were explaining what the Mikra says, first in Mishnah form, and then bring it down on the next level to Baraisa. Talmud, we're going to learn, is going to bring a whole new level of Mamata Lamaila that Mishnah, Baraisa, and Mikra do not have. Their Mikra for sure is Mamai Lamata. Mishnah and Baraisa is a combination. But the true Mamata Lamaila in Torah is going to come through Talmud. So let's read a few lines and just start to get our feet wet, and we'll see where he goes. Hine, he says, Talmud hu bebriya. Talmud, the Pri Eitz Chaim, if you remember when he began the whole topic, on the bottom of page 1364, he said Talmud is in Bria. Mishnah, we learned Yetzirah. Mikra and Asiyah. So Talmud is in Bria. V'hainu, shebizgalo se'er the Talmud hu be'elam ha'bria. I'm sorry, v'hainu shebizgalo se'er the Talmud, the revelation of the light of Talmud is in the world of Bria. Now, Bria is higher than Yetzirah and Asiyah, ostensibly. But we're soon going to learn, no, on the other hand, it doesn't come down as much in the Giluyim of Yetzirah, and definitely not into Asiyah. So he's going to explain what that means. Ach, masha mizgala, sham ma'oir ha'chochem deteru, b'chinas ha'ora levad loy etzem ha'oir. However, that which is revealed there from the oir, from the light of the wisdom of Torah, they all come from Chochem and the Torah. We learned earlier, everything comes from Chabad. The question, however, is, what part of it? So in Talmud, it's only a reflection, not etzem ha'oir. So now we're going like the other direction. Mikra was like etzem ha'oir. That's why it only can be expressed in Asiyah. Mishnah is more gilui of that etzem, but it's a gilui, and that's why it can be expressed in Yetzirah Chagas. Baraisa brings it down further. But now we're talking about it's not etzem ha'oir altogether. It's a ha'ora, only a reflection. V'zeu sha'briu b'chinas cheshach. That's why Bria is called cheshach, u'kamesha omar, u'boira cheshach. We say Yetzer Eir, Yetzirah is connected to light. Yetzer, you shape light, u'boira cheshach, and you create darkness. Bria is connected to darkness. Hainu shemei rak ha'ora levad. Why? Seemingly Bria is higher than Yetzirah. But Bria is more of a state of only reflection and not so much a revelation, and not so much a core revelation, and that's why it's related to Cheshach. He's going to discuss this at length. I know it sounds confusing because you'd think Bria is a higher Gili than Yetzirah, and Yetzirah is a higher Gili than Asiyah, but you're going to see how it all reverses in many different ways. We'll get to it.
In Torah or Bichlal?
Well, right now he's talking about Torah and Bichlal as well, because Bria, Yetzer Eir, Berach Cheshach, he's not talking about Torah, he's talking about Bria. This is going to be a long discussion, especially this discussion will continue primarily, where is it? Page 1380, and especially there's a whole section where he goes into detail. Yeah, after 1386. It's all going to be explained in very clear detail, but just have to be patient. That's why I wanted to give a right introduction to explain it all. In other words, Mikra, because it comes from such a high level, it goes down so low. Talmud does not come from such a high level. It comes from Nehi, as we're going to learn, only Ha'aretz, so it can be expressed only in Bria, which is a more dark. Now remember, darkness does not necessarily mean low. Darkness can be even higher than Gili. It's just not coming down into the world of Gili, as we shall learn. But I don't want to push this because I want to go slowly here. You'll see the parentheses, then he starts explaining it in detail. If you look at the parentheses, he right away qualifies that the ha'ara is coming from higher from the etzem ha'er of Yetzirah, but it's revealed only as a reflection. So bottom line is darkness doesn't always mean dark. Dark can mean it's higher than Gili as well. But we have to understand how that distinguishes between Mikra and Talmud. There's a lot to cover here. So we'll go through it all patiently. I'm going to stop here because I'm not going to answer these questions immediately. It's going to take a little time till he develops all these ideas. And again, we did learn this the first time at length. So we're going to definitely worthwhile looking back and hearing what was said then. But I'm going to learn it here as well because it's very relevant to the bigger theme. But again, it's quite dense and quite complex.
Why is there all higher than of Talmud?
So I just said this is going to be a developed theme that's going to take a few pages to explain. Okay. We didn't get into time. Just started. We just got our feet wet a bit. We're going to enter into this in the proper fashion in the coming classes. So all I can say is be patient. That's all. Or if you want, read on. You can read ahead. Fine. You don't have to wait for us to learn it. You can read ahead and see how he develops it. I just remember when we learned it the first time, it was also quite, it's essentially, there's a back and forth that's required to really fully understand it. It's not so straightforward. Okay, let's stop here. We'll stop here basically before Talmud. We'll go back to Talmud, middle of page 1370.